The fluorescent lights of the convenience store buzzed quietly overhead as she pushed through the glass door. It was almost midnight, and the parking lot was nearly empty except for a beat-up sedan and her own truck. She'd driven past 3 other stores to get to this one because old Mr. Chen, the owner, always had the best prices on protein bars and actually kept fresh fruit in stock. She was tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones after a 12-hour day. Her muscles ached in that familiar way that told her she'd pushed herself hard during training. But it was a good ache, the kind that meant progress. She grabbed a shopping basket near the entrance and headed toward the back of the store where the water bottles were kept. At first glance, she looked like anyone else who might stop at a convenience store late at night. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore plain jeans and a gray hoodie that had seen better days. There was nothing flashy about her appearance, nothing that screamed special or dangerous. She was average height, maybe a bit more fit than most, but not in an obvious way. The kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second thought. What nobody in that store could see was the 8 years of grueling training behind those calm eyes. The countless hours spent in conditions that would break most people. The missions she couldn't talk about. The mental toughness that had been forged through some of the hardest military training in the world. She was one of the first women to make it through Navy SEAL training, a fact she rarely mentioned to anyone outside her unit. She moved down the aisle, her eyes scanning the shelves with the same methodical attention she applied to everything in life. 3 bottles of water went into her basket. Then she turned toward the protein bars, mentally calculating which ones offered the best balance of nutrition and taste. The peanut butter ones were decent, even if they tasted like cardboard mixed with chalk. That's when she noticed them. 3 men were standing near the back corner of the store, partially hidden by a display of potato chips. They weren't shopping. They weren't even pretending to look at products. They were just standing there, and something about their body language made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. It was a subtle thing, the kind of detail most people would miss, but she'd been trained to notice these things. The tallest one had his hands in his jacket pockets, but his shoulders were tense. The second guy kept glancing toward the front counter where Mr. Chen stood, then back to the door. The third one, shorter and stockier than the others, had positioned himself in a way that blocked the back exit. They were young, probably in their mid-20s, and they had the nervous energy of people about to do something stupid. She didn't change her pace or her expression. That was rule number 1 when you sense danger. Never let them know you're aware. She continued shopping, picking up a few protein bars and adding them to her basket. But now her mind was running through calculations. Exits, distances, potential weapons. The layout of the store, where Mr. Chen was standing. How quickly she could move if she needed to. Years of training had taught her to assess threats in seconds. These guys weren't professionals. Real criminals would have been smoother, more controlled. These 3 had amateur written all over them. That made them unpredictable, which in some ways made them more dangerous. Professionals followed patterns. Amateurs panicked. She walked toward the counter, keeping the 3 men in her peripheral vision. Mr. Chen smiled when he saw her, his weathered face crinkling with genuine warmth. He was in his 70s, a kind man who'd immigrated from Taiwan 40 years ago and had run this store for the last 20. They'd chatted many times about his grandchildren, and he always asked about her day with real interest. "Working late again?" he asked in his accented English. "You know how it is," she replied with a small smile, setting her basket on the counter. That's when she heard the footsteps behind her. Not casual footsteps, purposeful ones. The 3 men were moving, and they were moving toward her and Mr. Chen. She could see the fear flash across the old man's face as he looked past her shoulder. He'd probably been robbed before. Most store owners in this neighborhood had been at some point. She turned slowly, deliberately, and found herself facing all 3 men. They'd spread out slightly, trying to use their numbers as intimidation. The tall one was now standing directly in front of her, less than 3 feet away. Up close, she could see the crude tattoos on his knuckles and smell the cigarette smoke on his clothes. His eyes had that glassy look that suggested he was high on something. "Nobody has to get hurt here," the tall one said, trying to sound threatening, but mostly just sounding desperate. "Just give us what's in the register and whatever you got in your pockets, and we'll be gone." The guy on her left, the stocky one, had pulled out a knife. It wasn't much of a knife, just a cheap folding blade probably bought at a gas station, but it was still a weapon. The third guy, nervous and twitchy, kept glancing at the door as if he was already planning his escape route. She looked at each of them in turn, her expression calm and unreadable. In her mind, she was already running through scenarios. The best outcome would be for these idiots to just leave. Nobody would get hurt, Mr. Chen wouldn't be traumatized, and these guys wouldn't end up in prison or the hospital. "You really don't want to do this," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't scared. It wasn't angry. It was just matter of fact, like she was giving them directions to the highway. "There's still time to walk away. Nobody's been hurt yet. You can just leave." The tall one laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the store's walls. "You think you're in a position to give us advice, lady? We're the ones making demands here." She could see Mr. Chen behind the counter, his hands shaking as he started to reach for the register. The poor man was terrified, probably thinking about his wife at home, his grandchildren who visited every Sunday. She couldn't let this happen. Not to him. Not to anyone. "Last chance," she said, and there was something in her tone that made the nervous one take a step back. Some primal part of his brain was screaming at him that something wasn't right here, that this woman wasn't reacting the way victims were supposed to react. But the tall one was too far gone, too committed to his terrible decision. He nodded at the stocky guy with the knife. "Teach her some respect." What happened next would change everything. The stocky guy stepped forward, pulled his fist back, and drove it hard into her ribs. It was meant to be a devastating blow, the kind that would drop someone to their knees, gasping for air and broken. She felt the impact. Felt her ribs compress under the force. The pain registered in her brain, sharp and immediate. But she didn't fall. She didn't gasp. She didn't even step backward. 8 years of conditioning, of learning to push through pain that would cripple normal people, meant she processed it differently. The pain was just information, data to be filed away and dealt with later. She turned her head slowly and looked at the stocky guy. Really looked at him. And for the first time, true fear flickered across his face. Because he'd just hit her as hard as he could, and she was still standing there like nothing had happened. "That," she said quietly, "was a mistake." The silence that followed was heavy and strange. Just seconds ago, the store had been filled with the sounds of threats and nervous movement. Now it felt like the whole world had paused to take a breath. The stocky guy who'd just punched her was staring at his own fist like it had betrayed him somehow. He'd felt his knuckles connect with her ribs, felt the solid impact. People were supposed to collapse when you hit them like that. They were supposed to cry out or at least stumble backward. She hadn't done any of those things. "What the hell?" the stocky guy muttered, taking a small step back. His knife was still in his other hand, but he was holding it differently now, less confident, more defensive. The tall one, the leader of this failed robbery attempt, tried to regain control of the situation. "I don't care if you think you're tough, lady. We've got a knife and there's 3 of us. You're gonna give us—" "No," she interrupted him, her voice still calm but now carrying an edge that cut through his words like they were nothing. "Here's what's actually going to happen. You 3 are going to leave this store right now. You're going to walk out that door, get in whatever car brought you here and drive away. And you're going to spend the rest of your lives being grateful that I'm giving you this chance." The nervous one, the youngest of the 3, actually took another step toward the door. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to run, but the tall one grabbed his shoulder, stopping him. "You think you're some kind of hero?" The tall one snarled at her. "You think you can take all 3 of us?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The way she stood there, perfectly balanced and completely relaxed despite what had just happened, said everything that needed saying. She looked like a person who knew exactly what she was capable of. And that knowledge gave her a kind of calm that was more terrifying than any threat could be. Behind the counter, Mr. Chen had frozen with his hand still near the register. He'd been about to hand over the money, do whatever it took to make these men leave. But now he was watching this woman who bought protein bars and chatted about the weather. And he was seeing something entirely different, something that made him think maybe he didn't know her as well as he thought. The stocky guy with the knife tried again. He was angry now, embarrassed that his punch hadn't worked. He stepped closer, waving the knife in what he probably thought was a threatening manner. "You better back down or I swear I'll—" He never got to finish that sentence. She moved so fast that later, when Mr. Chen tried to describe it to the police, he could barely put it into words. 1 second she was standing still, and the next she was in motion. Her hand shot out and grabbed the wrist holding the knife, twisting it in a way that made the stocky guy's entire body contort to follow. There was a sharp crack and the knife clattered to the floor. The guy screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure shock and pain. The tall one finally realized they'd made a terrible mistake. He lunged at her from the side, trying to use his size and weight to tackle her, but she'd already seen him moving. She'd probably seen him start to move before he'd even fully decided to do it. That was what training did. It made you faster than thought. She sidestepped his rush with minimal effort, like a matador avoiding a bull. As he stumbled past her, off balance and committed to his charge, she helped him along with a well-placed push that sent him crashing into the display of potato chips. Bags exploded everywhere as he hit the metal shelving hard. The whole structure rattled and swayed, and for a moment it looked like it might tip over on him. The nervous one was done. He'd seen enough. He turned to run for the door, but his feet got tangled with each other in his panic. He went down hard on the polished floor, his chin bouncing off the linoleum with a sound that made even Mr. Chen wince. It had been maybe 5 seconds since the first move. 5 seconds, and all three would-be robbers were on the ground in various states of pain and confusion, but she wasn't finished. The stocky guy was clutching his wrist and tears were streaming down his face. The tall one was trying to pull himself out of the potato chip wreckage, his nose bleeding from where it had connected with the metal shelf. The nervous one was still on the floor, stunned and disoriented. She moved to the tall one first. He was the leader, the most dangerous because he was the most desperate. As he tried to stand, she put a hand on his shoulder. It looked gentle, almost casual, but when she applied pressure, he went right back down to his knees with a gasp. "Stay," she said, like she was talking to a badly behaved dog. Then she turned to the stocky guy. His wrist was probably fractured, definitely dislocated. She'd felt it give when she twisted. He was in no shape to be a threat anymore, but she'd learned a long time ago that you don't make assumptions about people in pain. "Pain makes people unpredictable. How bad is it?" she asked him, her voice neutral. He couldn't even answer. He was hyperventilating, staring at his wrist, which was already starting to swell. In the back of her mind, she was noting the injury, already thinking about what she'd need to tell the paramedics when they arrived. The nervous one finally managed to push himself up to a sitting position. His chin was scraped and bleeding, and he had a wild, terrified look in his eyes. "Please," he managed to say. "Please, we didn't mean... we weren't going to really hurt anyone." She looked at him for a long moment. He was young, probably not even 25. Maybe this was his first time trying something like this. Maybe he'd been pressured into it by the other two. Or maybe he was just trying to play on her sympathy. "You brought a knife into a store and threatened an elderly man," she said quietly. "What did you think was going to happen?" Mr. Chen had finally moved from behind the counter. His hand was shaking as he reached for the phone to call the police, but his eyes never left her. She could see the questions forming in his mind. Who was this woman? What was she? "I'm calling the police," Mr. Chen said, his voice surprisingly steady despite his shaking hands. "Good," she replied. Then she pulled out her own phone and did the same. As she dialed, she kept her eyes on all three men. The tall one was still on his knees, blood dripping from his nose onto his shirt. The stocky one had curled into himself, cradling his injured wrist. The nervous one was sitting against a shelf, looking like he might throw up. The 911 operator answered on the second ring. "What's your emergency?" "This is Lieutenant Rivera," she said calmly. "I'm at Chen's convenience store on Maple Street. There's been an attempted robbery. 3 suspects are detained and need medical attention. One has a wrist injury, one has a possible broken nose, and one has facial lacerations. All 3 are conscious and breathing. Store owner and myself are unharmed. We need police and paramedics." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Did you say, Lieutenant?" "Navy," she confirmed. "I'll explain when officers arrive. Please send units now." The operator assured her help was on the way and asked her to stay on the line, but she politely declined and hung up. She needed both hands free, just in case any of these 3 got a second wind and tried something stupid. The tall one was looking up at her now, and there was something like respect mixed in with his pain and anger. "You're military," he said. It wasn't a question. "Was that not obvious?" she asked. "I thought you were just, I don't know." "A regular person. I am a regular person," she said. "That's what you don't get. You don't need to be special forces to make better choices than you did tonight." The stocky guy let out a sob. "My wrist, man. I think you broke my wrist." "Probably dislocated," she corrected. "The break is in your forearm. I felt it snap when you tried to pull away. The doctors will fix you up, but it's going to hurt for a while." Maybe use that time to think about your life choices. In the distance, sirens began to wail. The police station was only a few blocks away, and they were coming fast. She could see relief flood across Mr. Chen's face. He'd probably been robbed before, maybe even hurt before, and he'd probably thought tonight was going to be another traumatic memory to add to the collection. "Thank you," he said to her, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for protecting me." She shook her head slightly. "Thank you for not getting hurt. That would have been much more paperwork." It was a joke, a small attempt to lighten the moment, but it fell flat. Nobody was in the mood for humor. The three men on the floor were dealing with their pain in the dawning realization of how badly they'd screwed up their lives tonight. Mr. Chen was still processing what he'd just witnessed. The nervous one spoke up again. What are you going to tell the cops?" "The truth," she said simply. "That you three tried to rob this store, threatened Mr. Chen and myself. One of you assaulted me and I defended us. The security camera probably caught most of it anyway." All three men's eyes snapped to the camera mounted in the corner of the store. They'd been so focused on what they thought would be an easy target that they hadn't even noticed it. The tall one let out a bitter laugh. "We're so stupid." "Yes," she agreed. "You are, but stupid isn't permanent if you don't want it to be." The sirens were getting louder now. Red and blue lights began to flash through the store windows as the first police car pulled into the parking lot. The first officer through the door had her hand on her weapon, eyes scanning the scene with the trained alertness of someone who'd responded to too many convenience store robberies. She was young, probably only a few years out of the academy, with her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Behind her, an older male officer entered, moving to cover the other side of the store. What they saw must have confused them. Three men on the floor in various states of distress. An elderly Asian man behind the counter looking shaken but unharmed. And a woman in jeans and a hoodie standing calmly in the middle of it all, her posture relaxed but alert. "Who called this in?" the female officer asked, her hand still near her weapon. "I did," Lieutenant Rivera said, raising one hand slowly to show she wasn't a threat. "I'm the one who reported the incident. I also called, and so did Mr. Chen, the store owner." The older officer moved toward the three men on the floor while his partner focused on Rivera. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the suspects and come over here, please." Rivera complied without argument, moving slowly and deliberately so there would be no misunderstandings. As she approached the officer, she pulled out her military ID with 2 fingers and held it up. "Lieutenant Angela Rivera, United States Navy. I was shopping when these 3 men attempted to rob the store." The officer took the ID, examined it carefully, and her expression shifted. "Navy, what division?" "I can't discuss that here," Rivera said quietly, which was answer enough. The officer's eyebrows went up slightly. "Special operations. That explains some things." More police cars were arriving now. The parking lot was filling with flashing lights, and curious neighbors were starting to gather on the sidewalk, phones out and recording. An ambulance pulled in behind the squad cars, its lights adding to the chaotic display. The older officer was checking on the 3 suspects, calling for the paramedics to come in. "This one's got a wrist injury. Looks bad. This one's nose is definitely broken. And this one's got facial lacerations but seems okay otherwise." The stocky guy with the injured wrist looked up at the officer with desperate eyes. "She attacked us, man. We were just shopping and she went crazy." Rivera didn't react to the lie. She'd heard plenty of lies in her career, from enemy combatants trying to talk their way out of situations, from sources who turned out to be unreliable, from politicians who didn't want to admit mistakes. She just stood there calm and patient, waiting. The female officer looked at her. "Is that true?" "No," Rivera said simply. "The security camera will show what happened. Mr. Chen can also provide a statement. These 3 men came in after me, positioned themselves strategically around the store, then approached Mr. Chen and myself with threats and a weapon. One of them struck me in the ribs. I defended myself and Mr. Chen." "She's lying," the tall one shouted from the floor, his voice nasal from his broken nose. "She's trained to fight. She used excessive force. We didn't even have a chance." A new voice entered the conversation. "Nobody move. I want to see that security footage right now." Everyone turned to see a man in plain clothes entering the store, his detective's badge clipped to his belt. He was in his 50s, with gray hair and the weary expression of someone who'd seen every kind of stupid human behavior. His eyes swept the scene. taking it all in with practiced efficiency. "Detective Hayes," he introduced himself, looking at Rivera. "I happened to be 3 blocks away when the call came in. Convenience store robbery, 3 suspects down, 1 woman responsible." He studied her for a moment. "You're military?" "Yes, sir." "Lieutenant Angela Rivera, Special Operations?" "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly, like he was putting pieces together in his mind. Then he turned to Mr. Chen. "Sir, I understand you have security cameras. Can you show me the footage?" Mr. Chen nodded eagerly and gestured for the detective to come behind the counter. The old man's hands were steadier now with all these police around. He pulled up the security footage on a small monitor, and Detective Hayes leaned in to watch. The store fell quiet except for the groans of the injured men and the crackle of police radios. The paramedics had arrived and were starting to treat the suspects, but they kept glancing at Rivera with curiosity. 1 woman had done this to 3 men? They were clearly trying to work out how that was possible. Rivera knew what the detective was seeing on that monitor. The footage would show her shopping normally. It would show the 3 men entering and positioning themselves. It would show them approaching the counter, making threats. It would show the stocky one punching her in the ribs. And then it would show what happened next. Detective Hayes watched the footage twice. Then he straightened up and looked at Rivera with something that might have been respect. "Officer Chen," he called to the female officer. "Lieutenant Rivera is the victim here, not a suspect. Treat her accordingly." The tall one on the floor started shouting again. "That's not fair. She's getting special treatment because she's military. We have rights." Detective Hayes walked over and crouched down next to him. "You want to talk about rights? Let's talk about them. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise it, because everything on that camera shows exactly what Lieutenant Rivera said. You 3 came in here to rob this store. You threatened a 72-year-old man. You assaulted a member of the United States military. And you did it all on camera." He stood up and gestured to the officers. "Read them their rights. All 3 of them. Charges are attempted robbery, assault, and menacing. Add in possession of a weapon during a felony for the one with the knife." The stocky guy with the injured wrist was crying now, full-on sobbing as the reality of his situation hit him. "I didn't mean to. We were just desperate. We needed money." "There are food banks," Rivera said quietly. "There are churches that help people. There are programs for people who need assistance. Breaking the law wasn't your only option. It was just the easiest one you could think of." "Easy?" the nervous one said bitterly, touching his scraped chin. "This was easy?" "Easier than getting a job," she replied. "Easier than asking for help. Easier than doing the hard work of fixing your life." Detective Hayes pulled Rivera aside, while the officers were cuffing the suspects and the paramedics were preparing to transport them. "I need your full statement. This is going to be high profile once the media gets hold of it. Navy SEAL stops robbery single-handedly. The reporters are going to have a field day." Rivera winced. "I'd prefer to avoid that if possible." "I understand, but you assaulted 3 people even if it was justified self-defense. There's going to be an investigation. It's procedure." "I understand, sir." He studied her for a moment. "How bad are you hurt? That one guy hit you pretty hard in the ribs. I saw it on the camera." "I'm fine," she said automatically. "That's what everyone says. But I saw your face in the footage. Right after he hit you, most people would have gone down. You didn't even flinch." "Training," she said simply. "Right, training." He pulled out a notebook. "Walk me through it. Everything from the moment you entered the store." Rivera gave her statement clearly and concisely, leaving nothing out but adding no unnecessary details. Just the facts delivered in chronological order. Detective Hayes took notes, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly just listening. Mr. Chen gave his statement next, and his version matched Rivera's perfectly. He described how scared he'd been, how certain he was that he was about to be robbed or worse. He described how Rivera had tried to talk the men into leaving, how they'd refused, how one of them had hit her. "I thought she was going to be hurt," Mr. Chen said, his English breaking down a little as emotion overcame him. "I thought they would hurt her and then hurt me. But I've never seen anything like it. So fast, so controlled. She didn't hurt them more than necessary. She just stopped them." Detective Hayes looked at Rivera. "Is that accurate?" "You held back?" "Yes, sir. I used the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threats. All 3 men will make full recoveries. No permanent damage. You could have done worse? She met his eyes steadily. Much worse. But that wasn't necessary. He nodded and closed his notebook. You did good, Lieutenant. Textbook self-defense. But like I said, there's going to be paperwork. Lots of it. And probably a hearing to make sure everything was by the book. I understand. One of the paramedics approached them. Detective, we're ready to transport. The one with the wrist injury needs surgery. The one with the broken nose should be okay with just treatment. The third one is mostly just scraped up. Go ahead, Hayes said. Then he turned back to Rivera. You should probably get checked out too. That punch to your ribs might have done more damage than you think. I'm fine, Rivera insisted. I'm sure you are. But when this goes to court, and it will go to court, you want medical documentation. Trust me on this. She saw his point and nodded. Okay, I'll get checked out. As the paramedics loaded the 3 suspects into ambulances, a small crowd had gathered outside. People were taking pictures and videos, whispering to each other. Rivera could already see some of them typing on their phones, probably posting to social media. Within hours, this story would be all over the internet. A young patrol officer approached Detective Hayes. Sir, we've got news crews on the way. Channel 5 and Channel 7 both picked up the police scanner call. They'll be here. The hospital emergency room smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Lieutenant Rivera sat on an examination table, still wearing her hoodie and jeans, while a tired-looking doctor pressed carefully on her ribs. She didn't flinch, even when he found the exact spot where the punch had landed. You've got significant bruising here, he said, studying her with curious eyes, but no fractures that I can feel. We'll do an X-ray to be sure, but honestly, I've seen people with less obvious impact marks who were in much worse shape. You've got some serious muscle density here. I work out, Rivera said simply. I gathered that. He stepped back and made notes on his tablet. The police report says you were struck hard enough that the perpetrator expected you to go down. Why didn't you? Training. Pain management. I've been hit harder. The doctor shook his head slightly, like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Well, you're going to be sore for a few days. Ice it, take ibuprofen if you need it. But you'll be fine. He paused. The detective outside said you're military. Special forces? Something like that. Right, something like that. He signed off on her chart. You're free to go. The detective wants to talk to you before you leave, though. Rivera thanked him and hopped down from the table, moving easily despite the bruising. In the hallway outside, Detective Hayes was waiting with a cup of coffee in his hand and a weary expression on his face. How are the ribs? He asked, bruised. Nothing serious. Good. Because I've got news and you're not going to like it. He gestured for her to follow him to a quieter corner of the ER. The story's already hit social media. Someone in the crowd outside the store got footage of you being questioned by officers, posted it online with a caption about a woman who fought off 3 robbers. It's gone viral. 3 million views in the last 2 hours. Rivera closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Of course it has. It gets better. Or worse, depending on your perspective. One of the suspects, the tall one with the broken nose, he's already lawyered up. His attorney is making noise about excessive force. Says you used military training against unarmed civilians. One of them had a knife. I know. And it's all on camera. But they're going to make this complicated. His lawyer is talking to the media right now outside the county jail, saying her client is the real victim here. He tried to rob a store and threatened an elderly man. I know. And the DA knows. And anyone who watches the security footage knows. But in the court of public opinion, things get messy. Hayes took a sip of his coffee. There's also been a response from military bloggers and veterans groups. They're defending you, obviously, calling you a hero. There's already a hashtag trending. Something like, don't mess with SEAL women. It's turning into a whole thing. Rivera rubbed her temples. This was exactly what she didn't want. Attention, publicity. Her work required her to stay under the radar, and now she was trending on social media. Can I go home? She asked. Yes, but expect reporters camped outside your apartment. They've probably already figured out where you live. Public records aren't hard to access. He handed her a business card. That's my direct number. If you have any problems, any threats, anything at all, you call me immediately. Threats? It's the internet. There are people who think you're a hero, and there are people who think you're a violent thug. Both groups are going to be loud about it. Rivera took the card and nodded. Thank you, Detective. Thank you. You probably saved Mr. Chen's life tonight. Those three might have escalated if you hadn't been there. He paused, off the record. I'm glad you were there. And I'm glad you know how to handle yourself. But be prepared. The next few weeks are going to be rough. He wasn't wrong. By the time Rivera got home at 3 in the morning, there were indeed 2 news vans parked outside her apartment complex. She managed to slip past them through a back entrance, but she could hear reporters calling out questions in the parking lot, hoping to catch someone who knew her. She locked her apartment door, drew all the curtains, and finally let herself feel the exhaustion. Her ribs ached now that the adrenaline had worn off. Her hands were sore from the brief fight. But more than that, she was tired from the mental strain of it all, the constant questions, the knowledge that her face was now all over the internet, the worry about how this would affect her career. Her phone buzzed. A text from her commanding officer, sent at 2 in the morning. Saw the news. Call me when you can. That conversation could wait until morning. She took a hot shower, letting the water ease some of the tension in her muscles, then finally collapsed into bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept replaying the incident. Had she used too much force? Could she have de-escalated the situation better? Would those 3 men have actually hurt Mr. Chen if she hadn't been there? These were the questions that would haunt her, even though logically she knew she'd done everything right. The next morning brought more complications. Her phone was flooded with messages, reporters requesting interviews, friends and family who'd seen the news and were worried, veterans groups asking her to speak at events, and, disturbingly, a few threatening messages from people who thought she was a symbol of military aggression. Detective Hayes had been right. This was turning into a whole thing. The knock on her door came at 9 a.m. She looked through the peephole to see a woman in a business suit, alone, carrying a briefcase. Lieutenant Rivera, my name is Michelle Park. I'm an attorney with the Judge Advocate General's Corps. Your commanding officer asked me to reach out. Rivera opened the door and let her in. Michelle Park was in her 40s, professional and direct. She declined coffee and got straight to business. You're going to be investigated, Park said without preamble. It's standard procedure when military personnel use force against civilians, even in self-defense. The Navy needs to make sure everything was above board. I understand. Good. Because it's going to be thorough. They'll interview you multiple times. They'll review the security footage frame by frame. They'll talk to witnesses, examine the suspect's injuries, everything. Park pulled out some papers from her briefcase. The good news is that from what I've seen, you're clearly in the right. Classic self-defense situation. The bad news is that this is now a media circus, which means the Navy has to be extra careful. Will I be suspended? Not unless something unexpected comes up in the investigation. But you'll probably be reassigned to desk duty temporarily. Your CO wants you off the street until this blows over. Park looked at her seriously. How are you handling all this? I'm fine. That's what everyone says. But I've seen good people get chewed up by media attention. It can be overwhelming. Rivera didn't respond. She was fine. She'd dealt with worse pressure than reporters and internet trolls. Park seemed to read her thoughts. It's different when it's personal. In your work, you're usually anonymous. Now everyone knows your face, your name. They think they know you. They don't. But they think they do. That can mess with your head. Over the next few days, the story continued to grow. The security footage predictably got leaked online. Within hours, millions of people had watched her defend herself and Mr. Chen. The comment sections were war zones. Some people praised her. Others criticized her. Everyone had an opinion. The 3 suspects were formally charged. The tall one, whose name was revealed to be Kevin Walsh, continued to claim he was the victim. His lawyer held a press conference showing photos of his injuries, trying to garner sympathy. It didn't work. The security footage was too clear, and public opinion was overwhelmingly on Rivera's side. Mr. Chen became a minor celebrity himself. News crews interviewed him repeatedly, and he told the story with growing confidence each time. She saved my life, he said in one interview. Those men, they were going to hurt me. I know it. She stopped them. She's a hero. The veterans community rallied around her. Groups that advocated for women in combat roles held her up as an example of why women belonged in special operations. Some active duty SEALs, speaking anonymously, confirmed that she was indeed one of the first women to complete the training program, and that she was highly respected in the community. But there was also backlash. Some people questioned whether her military training made her a danger to the public. Others claimed she could have de-escalated without violence. A few conspiracy theorists suggested the whole thing was staged. The internet being the internet, things got ugly. Rivera tried to ignore it all. She focused on the investigation, giving detailed statements, answering every question thoroughly. The investigators were professional but thorough. They examined every second of the security footage. They interviewed Mr. Chen multiple times. They even brought in a use-of-force expert to analyze her actions. After 2 weeks, the investigation concluded what anyone with common sense could have seen from the start. Lieutenant Rivera had acted in lawful self-defense, using appropriate force to protect herself and another person from imminent harm. No charges would be filed. No disciplinary action would be taken, but the damage was done. Her face was now permanently associated with the incident. A quick search of her name brought up hundreds of articles, videos, and social media posts. Her privacy was gone. The court case for the 3 suspects moved forward. Kevin Walsh, the tall one, eventually dropped his excessive force claims when his lawyer explained that the HOA Diaries. 4 months after the incident, Lieutenant Rivera stood in front of a courtroom packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. This was the sentencing hearing for Kevin Walsh, the tall one who'd led the attempted robbery. The other 2 had already been sentenced in separate hearings. But Walsh had insisted on his right to a full hearing, probably hoping for more media attention. Rivera had been asked to provide a victim impact statement. She'd spent days thinking about what to say, writing and rewriting, trying to find the right words. Finally, she'd settled on something simple and honest. The judge called her to the stand. She walked up calmly, aware of all the eyes on her. The cameras were recording everything. This would be on the news tonight, dissected and analyzed by people who thought they understood what had happened that night in the convenience store. She was sworn in and took her seat. The prosecutor nodded at her encouragingly. Walsh sat at the defense table, his lawyer beside him, looking much different than he had that night. He was cleaned up, wearing a suit, probably on his lawyer's advice to look respectable. His nose had healed, though it sat slightly crooked now, a permanent reminder of his bad decision. Lieutenant Rivera, the judge said, "You may proceed with your statement." She took a breath and began. "Your Honor, when I walked into that convenience store 4 months ago, I was just trying to buy some water and protein bars. I'd had a long day and I was tired. I didn't want to be a hero. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to get my groceries and go home." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Kevin Walsh and his friends made a choice that night. They chose to walk into that store with the intention of committing a crime. They chose to threaten Mr. Chen, an elderly man who's never hurt anyone in his life. They chose to confront me when I tried to de-escalate the situation. And one of them chose to assault me. Walsh was looking down at the table, refusing to meet her eyes. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about that night," Rivera continued. "About what I could have done differently. About whether I used too much force. About whether those few seconds of violence could have been avoided. And the conclusion I keep coming back to is this. I did what I was trained to do. I protected myself and another person from harm." She shifted in her seat, feeling the slight ache in her ribs that had never quite gone away. "But I also think about the choices these men made. Not just that night, but all the choices that led them to that moment. The choice to not seek legitimate help when they needed money. The choice to see crime as easier than hard work. The choice to view an elderly man as a target rather than as someone's grandfather." Now she looked directly at Walsh. "I don't hate you, Kevin. I don't think you're evil. I think you made terrible choices, and those choices have consequences. You're sitting here today because of your own actions, not because of anything I did. I was just the person who happened to be there when your bad decisions caught up with you." She turned back to the judge. "I've received a lot of attention because of this incident. Some people call me a hero. I don't see it that way. I was just someone who could defend themselves when necessary. The real tragedy is that it was necessary at all. That 3 young men thought robbing a store was their best option. That Mr. Chen had to fear for his life over the few $100s in his register." Rivera paused again, making sure she said this next part clearly. "I'm not asking for harsh punishment for these men. That's not my place. But I am asking that whatever sentence is given, it includes programs that might actually help them. Education, job training, counseling, something that gives them better options than the ones they've been choosing. Because if they get out of prison and nothing has changed, they'll just make the same choices again. And next time, the person they target might not be able to defend themselves. She looked at Walsh one more time. You can learn from this, Kevin. All three of you can. This can be the moment that changed your life for the better, or it can be just another bad choice in a long line of bad choices. That's up to you. She stood up. That's all I have to say, Your Honor. The courtroom was quiet as she walked back to her seat. Even the reporters had stopped typing for a moment. It wasn't the angry, vengeful statement many of them had probably expected. It was something else entirely. Walsh's lawyer stood up for his turn. He'd clearly expected Rivera to call for maximum punishment, and now he had to adjust his strategy. He fumbled through his prepared remarks about his client's difficult childhood, his struggles with addiction, his remorse for his actions. The judge listened to everything, then delivered the sentence. 3 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 18 months contingent on completing educational and vocational programs. It was fair. Not too harsh, not too lenient. Justice, imperfect but real. As the courtroom emptied, Detective Hayes approached Rivera. That was a good statement, he said. A lot of victims want blood. You want rehabilitation? I want this to mean something, Rivera replied. If he goes to prison, learns nothing, and comes out the same person, then nothing changes. We'll just do this dance again with someone else. You're more optimistic about human nature than I am, maybe. Or maybe I've just seen enough violence to know it doesn't solve anything. Long term. Outside the courthouse, the media was waiting. Rivera had agreed to give one interview, just one, in hopes that it would satisfy their curiosity and they'd leave her alone. She'd chosen a local reporter who'd been fair in her coverage, a woman named Lisa Chen, who happened to be Mr. Chen's niece. The interview took place in a quiet room away from the circus outside. Lisa set up her camera and sat down across from Rivera. Thank you for doing this, Lisa said. I know you've avoided the press. I'm hoping this will be the end of it, Rivera admitted. One interview, everything I want to say, and then I can move on. Fair enough. Let's start with the obvious question. How has your life changed since that night? Rivera thought about it. In some ways, everything's changed. I can't go to a grocery store without people recognizing me. I get stopped on the street. People want to take pictures, ask questions, tell me their opinions about what happened. My privacy is gone. Do you regret what you did? No, never. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Mr. Chen was scared. I regret that 3 young men ruined their lives over a few $100s. But I don't regret protecting myself and someone else. Some people have said you used excessive force. Some people will always say that. But I used the minimum force necessary to stop the threat. That's what I was trained to do. If I'd wanted to use excessive force, those 3 men would have been hurt much worse. Lisa nodded. There's been a lot of discussion about women in combat roles, women in special operations. You've become a symbol for that debate whether you wanted to or not. How do you feel about that? Rivera sighed. I never wanted to be a symbol. I just wanted to do my job. But if my experience helps other women who want to serve in combat roles, then I guess that's something positive that came from all this. What do you want people to know about that night? The real story, not the viral video version? I want people to know that violence should always be a last resort. I tried to talk those men into leaving. I gave them a chance to walk away. They chose not to take it. Rivera leaned forward slightly. I also want people to know that self-defense isn't about being aggressive or tough. It's about protecting yourself and others. I don't go around looking for fights. I'd rather never be in that situation again. And what about Kevin Walsh and the others? Your statement in court was surprisingly compassionate. Because I mean it. I don't want revenge. I want them to become better people. I want them to learn from this. If they come out of prison and commit another crime, then what was the point of any of this? The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from her military training to her advice for young women interested in special operations. When it was over, Lisa thanked her and promised the segment would be fair and balanced. One more thing, Lisa said as Rivera was leaving. My uncle, Mr. Chen, he wanted me to give you this. She handed Rivera an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note in slightly shaky English. Thank you for saving old man's life. You are always welcome in my store. Free protein bars forever. Your friend, Mr. Chen. Rivera felt her eyes water slightly. Of all the attention, all the interviews, all the social media posts, This simple note meant more than any of it. Over the next few months, the media attention finally began to fade. There were new stories, new viral moments, new things for people to argue about online. Rivera gradually returned to her normal duties, though normal would never quite be the same. She did take Mr. Chen up on his offer, stopping by his store regularly. He always had her favorite protein bars in stock, and they'd chat about his grandchildren and the weather and anything other than that night. It became their unspoken agreement. The past was the past. The women's self-defense organization that had approached her months ago reached out again, and this time she said yes. She started teaching a class on weekends, showing women basic techniques for protecting themselves. Not to turn them into fighters, but to give them confidence and options if they ever found themselves in danger. One of her students was a young woman who'd been followed home from work one night. She'd froze,